South Africa continues to try and address strained relations between itself and the United States President Donald Trump's administration. Pretoria reported to have sent a delegation to Washington in a bid to mend diplomatic ties. Let's get more detail now. Presidency spokesperson Vincent Magwenya joining us this evening. Mr. Magwenya, good evening to you and thanks for your time. Let's start with a confirmation that indeed a delegation has gone to Washington and who may be leading the envoys.
No, Koli, unfortunately, there is no delegation that has been dispatched by the president, nor by the government. Your correspondent in Washington, Simon Marks, asked me about this yesterday, and I did confirm with him that there's been no such delegation that has been confirmed or dispatched, rather, by the president. What we've said on record is that whilst we would like to send a government delegation to Washington, the timing is not ideal at the moment for a couple of reasons. One being mainly the fact that there are still vacancies within the Trump administration in the areas of decision-making and influence that interface rather with African affairs, and that will normally interface with us in the normal course of managing diplomatic relations. Secondly, we've said whilst we will not entertain engaging over what we call megaphone diplomacy, we remain open in engaging with the Trump administration and, more importantly, building what will be a mutually beneficial trade, political, and diplomatic relationship. But the timing as things stand is not ideal at all for the president to dispatch such a delegation, only when the environment is deemed to be conducive that we can dispatch such a delegation.
Yeah. All right. So are you aware, though, of this delegation or perhaps this visit by the former Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Naledi Pandor? Are you at all aware about her visit to the United States?
No, Polly, I'm not. As I said, that's the question I responded to yesterday to your Washington correspondent, Simon Marks, and I confirmed with him that I was not aware of the former minister being present in Washington in a capacity that will be representative of the government. No, I'm not.
Yeah. All right. There is concern, though, Mr. Magwenya, that the longer it takes for the South African government to send some people to Washington, the more this administration is going to listen to groupings such as AfriForum/Solidarity, who essentially are just making things a little more uncomfortable for the country there. Is that a concern for the presidency?
No, Polly, when the president sends a delegation to Washington, number one, it will be a high-level delegation of ministers. They will be drawn from all parties represented within the GNU. They will be ministers who also lead portfolios that are material in the process of our trade as well as our political and diplomatic relationship with the United States. At this stage, it doesn't seem that when that delegation, if that delegation, for example, were to leave tomorrow, it will not be able to meet corresponding counterparts in this regard. So when we say the timing is not ideal, is because of the assessment that has been made by our own ambassador in Washington, as well as the knowledge that we have that in the critical areas of decision-making and influence within the administration that interface with us, or rather that are responsible in what we call African affairs, there are vacancies there. So rushing to send a delegation when they will not, be able to meet their counterparts and hold meaningful discussions will be counterproductive at this stage. Having said that, that does not mean that there are no attempts that are being made to reach out to the Trump administration with the purpose of setting the stage and creating what will be a conducive environment to reset the relationship and take the relationship forward from a trade as well as a diplomatic point of view. The president is on record clearly saying he's not going to send a delegation there to explain ourselves. What we would like to do will be to send a delegation to the US when we have a solid trade proposal that we would like to put on the table, a proposal that will be mutually beneficial for both countries. At this stage, that work has not been completed, and therefore it will not be prudent for us to rush sending a delegation there just because others with more nefarious intentions have decided to send delegations which are not legitimately or who were not legitimately representing the government or the people of South Africa.
Yeah. Very interesting words that you have just used there, Mr. Magwenya, and they almost seem to dovetail with what the president's national security advisor, who was talking to the Sunday Times, seemed to suggest, and that is that perhaps there is no need for South Africa to go and explain itself and its policies to Washington. I'm beginning to wonder whether President Ramaphosa, whether there will ever come a time where President Ramaphosa meets with his US counterpart. Do you think there is reticence in that regard?
Well, Toli, first of all, some of the sentiments that are being attributed to the National Security Advisor are not entirely accurate with respect to the absence of appetite to engage with the Trump administration through a delegation. As I've said, it's a question of timing. More directly with respect to your question, invariably, Toli, there will be a discussion between President Ramaphosa and President Trump at some point. There will be discussions at higher levels of leadership from both countries with respect to what we continue to see as a strategic relationship between the US and South Africa. You will also note, Ole, that we form part of the troika of the G20 together with the United States. South Africa will hand over the presidency of the G20 to the United States. And in that regard, there will be engagements with respect to that process. There is no way that we're not going to talk to each other. The US is South Africa's largest trading partner. South Africa is the US's largest African importer of its goods. So at some point, there will be conversation. We are observing with some concern the unfortunate megaphone diplomacy issues being tackled via social media channels, often or mostly laced with misinformation and untruths. Be that as it may, we remain steadfast that we are committed in this relationship, and we will do our best to ensure that we remain in the relationship in a manner that serves our economic interest, but also in a manner that is characterized by mutual respect and respect for our independence as a country as well as our sovereignty.
Final question to you, sir, and briefly if you can. South Africa's long-standing relationship with Russia, that basically stands, but there does appear to be warming of relations between the US and Russia. You said earlier you will continue using channels, various channels, to try and warm these relations. Might Russia be one of those?
No, Oli, we have our own bilateral relationship with Russia, which has its own characteristic, sort of historical rather features to it. With respect to the United States, look, Oli, with any other diplomatic situation or standoff in this regard, you always have a number of options at your disposal, including what we call backdoor channels. We do indeed have those backdoor channels to various decision makers in the United States, including President Trump. And as I've said to you, in the absence of a delegation going to the United States does not equate to the absence of attempts on our part to make sure that we do the best we can to find ways to reset this relationship and restore its strategic and mutually beneficial importance. So we'll continue doing that. But for your comfort, we have our own backdoor channels that we are utilizing. And at the right time or an appropriate time, you will see all these efforts coming to fruition. And we remain hopeful that the megaphone sort of diplomatic noise that we currently are subjected to will subside, and we will be able to have something tangible on the table that that we can engage over with our U.S. counterparts, and that, more importantly, will be very much focused on a trade deal, as well as other issues that are of mutual interest between the two countries.
And when is it that South Africa is going to receive President Zelensky? Mr. Magwenya, you still there?
Okay, now I can hear you. I lost you for a second there, Toli. My apologies.
I'll be quick about it. The announcement recently, or at least expectations, are that the Ukrainian leader is going to land in South Africa. When might that be?
Okay, Toli, that will be on the 10th of April. And that visit, as we have said, is a culmination of a number of engagements that President Ramaphosa has held with both President Zelensky and President Putin with respect to supporting both warring parties to finding a path to peace, which President Ramaphosa has always been consistent in saying it's a path through dialogue. It's a war that will never be won militarily. We are, in fact, pleased that the Trump administration is aligned to our position in this regard, that there ought to be negotiations with respect to resolving that conflict. We believe that those negotiations must be inclusive. They must accommodate and include all parties that are impacted by that conflict, and there must be negotiations that will set that part of the world on a lasting pace.
Vincent Magwenya, thank you very much for that confirmation. So the 10th of April, that will be the day that President Zelensky lands on South African shores, and it's all part of South Africa's effort to try and bring these warring parties to one table.